It's almost 1 in the morning and I've rewound the same 12 seconds 4 times. A guy calls into a fake therapy hotline, voice shaking a little, and says he needs to open up about his financial situation. That's it. That's the whole confession. And somehow my chest goes tight. Before he even finishes the sentence, the room reacts like he's said something illegal. Gasping. Someone hisses, "Did he really say that word?" Another voice snaps, "We do not say that word in here. It's a joke, a bit." But I paused it and just sat there, laughing and flinching at once. Turns out this is episode 2 of a show called Man vs. Mind, hosted by two guys, Tim and Jay, who spent part 1 just trying to say the word money out loud without flinching. Part 2 is where they actually go looking for why. I wrote the title down before I even hit play again. Before the episode even gets going, Tim mentions a poll he ran on their Instagram. Just one question. On a scale after payday, how stressful does money actually feel to you? Simple, anonymous, 2 taps and you're done. I thought, easy, everyone answers that one. I was wrong, and so was he. 0. Not one response. Tim said it outright, not a single person answered, and that never happens to them. Their polls usually get real engagement, people messaging in, a fair number weighing in with an opinion. This time, nothing. A whole audience that usually talks just quietly closed the app instead. I sat with that longer than I expected to. Only one message came through, sent directly, not on the poll. Someone wrote that people need to actually live within their means and stop measuring themselves against friends whose circumstances are completely different. It's obvious advice on paper, but I noticed how careful they were to send it privately, not publicly. Like even admitting you think about this stuff needs its own quiet channel. Jay actually said it on air. He called the silence itself very telling, more telling than any answer could have been. And that's the part that got me, because usually when something goes quiet online, we assume nobody cares. This was the opposite. People cared so much they wouldn't even tap one button anonymously. Silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's the loudest answer in the room. So then they asked the actual question, the one underneath the poll and the silence and the joke about the forbidden word. Why is this the one topic that shuts an entire comment section down? Not politics, not relationships, not anything else they've covered on the show. Money specifically. I stopped the video there and just wrote that question at the top of a blank page myself. Tim's answer was cultural, and it landed somewhere specific for me too. Growing up British, apparently, you're taught to keep your cards close to your chest about this particular subject, no matter what. Not a rule anyone ever writes down. Just something absorbed early, the same way you learn to say sorry when someone else bumps into you. Nobody sat me down and said it either. I just knew. I've checked my own balance 4 times just today. 4. Jay went further, said if you do talk about it openly, it reads as vulgar almost immediately. He's always going on about what he owns, what car he drives. People start saying, like the second you mention a number out loud. So the safest move becomes silence, not because you don't have anything to say, but because saying it correctly seems genuinely impossible. There's no clean way to just state a fact. And there's a second fear sitting right under the first one. If people know you had money and then it disappears, you don't just lose the money, you become a story. The person who had it all and lost it. Everyone's cautionary tale at a dinner party. That's a specific kind of exposure most people would rather avoid completely, so the safer option is never letting anyone see the number to begin with. Tim told a story about a neighbor from years back, his best friend's granddad, one of the loveliest men he'd ever met, multi-millionaire, lived in an enormous house with all the trimmings you'd expect. Then his own tax situation went sideways and took basically everything with it. Not a scandal, not fraud, just the wrong paperwork at the wrong time, and an entire fortune gone. Here's the detail that actually stuck with me. After all of that, he was still the happiest man anyone in that family knew. Didn't seem to bother him, not outwardly anyway. No bitterness, no performance of loss. Just a man who apparently understood something about money that took everything being taken away for the rest of us to even glimpse. I underlined that line twice on my notes app. Then Jay pointed out something colder. Visible wealth isn't just socially risky, it's physically risky. He brought up footballers whose houses get targeted specifically because everyone can see exactly when they're not home, because they're literally on television being not home. If people know what you're earning in a given week, they also know roughly what's sitting in your house waiting for someone to take it. Tim said if he ever won the lottery, he wouldn't want it made public, wouldn't want to be the person doing newspaper interviews holding an oversized check. He'd rather disappear, change his name, vanish with his family. Except apparently over there, winning comes with fine print. You're required to be shown off publicly as a condition of collecting the money. No quiet option, no choosing invisibility. The prize demands your face. So by this point, they'd actually named both fears out loud, sitting right next to each other. Shame if you don't have enough, and people can tell, and shame if you have plenty and let it show. two completely opposite situations producing the exact same instinct, which is to just say nothing at all. I hadn't thought about it as one instinct wearing two different costumes until they said it plainly. Jay admitted something pretty honest here. He said he's never actually been in a position financially to feel shame about having too much, because he's never had enough to worry about that particular problem. It made me laugh, but only for a second, because underneath the joke was something quietly sad, a whole category of shame he'd simply never gotten close enough to earn. He only knew the other kind. What he did know was the feeling of being younger, in a bigger social circle, where every single weekend seemed to be somebody's birthday or some expensive celebration you were expected to just show up for, and sitting there thinking, I genuinely cannot afford this, over and over, until the thought stops feeling like a fact and starts feeling like a verdict on who you are as a person. And that's the actual bind, the one underneath all of it. Either you say the honest thing out loud, I can't afford this, and sit with how that sounds, or you say nothing, show up anyway, and quietly put yourself in a worse financial position just to avoid an uncomfortable sentence. Both options cost something. One costs your pride, the other costs actual money you didn't have to begin with. Jay said this happened to him constantly. Birthdays, gatherings, whatever it was, and an empty bank account sitting underneath all of it. And there's only so many excuses a person can invent before it starts looking like you don't actually want to see these people, when the real reason is just that you don't have the money, and saying that felt somehow worse than lying about it instead. 3 excuses in one single month. 3. What actually saved him, he said, was that his core group would just quietly step in, telling him, don't worry, we've got you this time, you'll catch us back tenfold eventually. Which sounds generous, and it was, but he also called it an expensive scheme to be signed up to, because now there's a running tally nobody wrote down anywhere, and you're the only one who remembers every single line of it. Then Tim shared his own version. When he and his wife first moved to Dubai, they were living on one modest salary, and he stressed that word, modest, more than once, like he needed me to actually believe it before we went further. New city, new cost of living, and suddenly friends whose situations looked nothing like his, going out for dinners like it was nothing, expecting him to just keep pace. He actually did the math once, quietly, on his own. One birthday dinner invite worked out to roughly 10% of his entire monthly take-home pay for a single evening out. 10% gone on one dinner, while the rest of the month still needed covering. He said he used made-up numbers on the show so nobody could reverse engineer his real salary, which honestly told me everything about the shame attached. So instead of another excuse, he chose the blunt version and said it directly, more than once, I don't earn as much as you and I can't afford to do this. No softening it, no invented conflict, just the plain sentence out loud to people's faces. He called it shameless, but you could hear in his voice it cost him something every single time he had to say it out loud, except later, something happened that he still sounded angry about. A friend quietly left him out of plans with a wider group, not on purpose out of malice, but on the assumption that Tim simply couldn't afford whatever was happening that day. No conversation, no checking, just a decision made silently on his behalf, based on a truth he'd shared honestly once and that got frozen into a permanent assumption about him. He said on air, plainly, that he was livid about it, and that word stuck out because he doesn't usually talk in those terms. Not because he was excluded exactly, but because nobody asked. He'd have told them the truth again, I can't afford it but I still want to be there, and let them decide. Instead the decision got made for him, quietly, and he only found out afterward. Jay pushed back a little, gently, wondering if maybe the friend was actually trying to protect him from an awkward moment, not punish him. Tim wasn't fully convinced. And that disagreement between the two of them was actually the most interesting part to me, because neither one was wrong. Being honest about money is supposed to be the brave, healthy option. Apparently it can still get you quietly written out anyway. They eventually called it what it was, a genuinely no-win situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, Jay said. Protect someone's pride by not inviting them, and you've made a decision that isn't yours to make. Invite them anyway and force them to say no themselves, and you've handed them the exact discomfort you were trying to avoid. If you're the kind of person who reads other people's notes apps too, stick around, I write this stuff down regularly. Okay, I almost didn't include this part, because it's the one that made me rethink everything I'd just written. Tim brought up Japan, where traditionally the whole salary goes straight to the wife, who manages the household and hands the husband back a small monthly allowance, roughly 10%, just for himself. Not hidden, not shameful, just the agreed system, spoken about completely openly by everyone involved in it. That allowance is apparently where the whole salaryman culture comes from, the husband taking his cut and going out to get properly thoroughly drunk with it. And everyone knows it, which is exactly why you'll see photos of these men asleep on train platforms or slumped on the floor of a station, and nobody bothers them, because the entire city already understands exactly what happened and exactly why. Jay mentioned other cultures too, where sending money home to parents isn't hidden either, it's just expected, openly discussed. People will say plainly, I need this much to survive here, but that leaves me this much to send home for the bills. No math done in secret, no shame folded into the number, just an honest accounting spoken out loud between people who trust each other with the actual figures. Put next to that, Western culture just looks strange, closed off, tight-lipped, treating a normal number like it's a diagnosis you're not allowed to say in front of people. I grew up assuming that silence was just how humans naturally are about money, some universal instinct. Turns out it isn't universal at all, it's regional, learned. Which means somewhere along the way somebody decided we should all go quiet, and we just agreed. Jay's own wife isn't from Britain, and he said it's completely different inside her family. Before they were even married, they were already openly discussing how they'd handle finances together, whether to share accounts, how to split things out loud as a normal planning conversation. And with her wider family, if someone's struggling, they just go straight to whoever's at the top and ask, what do you need? How do we fix this? Okay. Here's the part I keep avoiding writing about, and Tim told it first, which is probably why I'm even letting myself go near it. He said he and his wife recently needed to borrow money, and had to go ask his own parents for it, something he said he'd genuinely never had to do before, not like this, not as an adult with a real problem to explain. He said he was terrified before asking, bracing for a cross-examination, expecting his parents to want a full accounting of exactly how he'd ended up needing help, what he'd done wrong, where the money had gone. He rehearsed the conversation in his head like a defense, ready to justify every decision that had led him to that specific, humbling phone call, asking for cash he genuinely needed and hated admitting to. Instead, his parents just said, okay, how much do you need? No interrogation, no forensic review of his bank statements. Just a plain, kind, practical question, followed by, when can you pay it back? And he said the pressure he'd been carrying just disappeared in that exact moment, all at once, like it had never needed to be there in the first place, like he'd built the whole fear from nothing. He actually said that part out loud on the show, that the whole fear of judgment, the whole expectation of being cross-examined, had basically been entirely in his own head the whole time. Nobody else was going to shame him the way he'd already been quietly shaming himself for weeks beforehand. Which made me think about every single conversation I've avoided having, purely because of a version of someone that only exists in my imagination. Jay named the actual mechanism underneath all of it. Needing money feels like confessing you're failing, like admitting you don't have what you're supposed to have to survive on your own, without help, without anyone noticing you couldn't quite manage it. It's never really about the number itself, it's about what the number seems to say about you as a person, your worth, your competence, your whole adult standing. And then Jay said having a kid multiplies that pressure past anything he'd felt before, because it stops being just about him. Suddenly it's not, I can't manage, it's, I have a wife, I have a child, and I still can't figure this out. The stakes attach themselves to another small person who didn't choose any of it, and that changes the entire weight of every single financial decision you make. Jay went quieter here, talking about a stretch when he was out of work entirely. Before he ever had to ask, someone reached out first, gently, are you all right? Do you need a bit just to keep the lights on, keep the apartment going? People could see how hard he was trying, and they offered before he had to find the words himself, which he called uplifting and horrible in the exact same breath. And even with the offer right there in front of him, kind, genuine, no strings on it, he said some part of him still wanted to find another way, any other way, before saying yes to someone he loved. Even best friends, even family, there was still this instinct to struggle privately rather than let the people closest to him actually watch him need something. I recognized that instinct immediately, uncomfortably immediately. Then Jay named the deeper layer underneath the money itself. It's not only financial debt you're afraid of, it's moral debt, the invisible obligation that shifts a relationship once someone's helped you through something real. It can change the whole dynamic quietly, permanently, in ways neither person says out loud. And that's exactly where I had to stop the episode, because that sentence describes something I've never once written down before. Here's what I've learned about the friends who stick around. Nobody who really loves you keeps a ledger. My roommate covered my rent one October and never brought it up again, not once. 8 months later, when she was between jobs, I paid for groceries for 6 weeks and never mentioned it either. That's the actual rule nobody teaches you. Real kindness doesn't wait to be repaid out loud. I need to stop here for a second, close the notebook, get some water, because the next part is heavier. There's a whole other side to this I haven't touched, the part about status, about people who quietly have money and go out of their way to hide it, and people who don't have it and spend everything trying to look like they do. Stay with me. Okay, I'm back. Same joke I always make to myself before I open this app again, the one about how this whole thing is basically unlicensed therapy at midnight. No couch, no diploma, only me and a blinking cursor. Second half. This is where I actually get honest about the years I spent broke while pretending otherwise. My paycheck landed on a Friday 2 weeks ago, and by the following Tuesday it was gone. Not blown on anything fun, only gone. Rent took the biggest bite, then my car insurance renewed itself without warning, then a subscription I forgot I still had, all inside the same 7 days. It felt like the entire world had my card number memorized and everyone decided to charge it at once. That's nothing compared to what happened to my sister on her trip a few years back. She rented a car, lent it to someone in the family for one afternoon, and it got sideswiped twice, once on each side, by two completely different drivers. Neither of them had insurance. Two door panels and both back corners needed replacing before she could even hand the car back. Mine goes further back, 2013, a work trip to the US. Pulled up early to a meeting and at an intersection an SUV going about 40 kilometers over the limit T-boned the car I was in. We spun into oncoming traffic and I got knocked out cold for a few seconds. When I came to, the driver's door was caved in and I could smell gas. We got out fast. Here's the small detail that saved us. At the airport, I'd asked if we really needed the extra insurance and almost said no to save $20. We got it anyway. 2 days later, the car was a wreck on a tow truck and all we handed the rental desk was a broken GPS unit. $20 saved us from a bill that would have ruined us both. That's the physical version of money going sideways. The emotional version is quieter and somehow worse. If something good happens financially while a friend is struggling, I actually hesitate to say it out loud, not because I'm ashamed of doing well, but because I'm terrified it'll land like a brag, like I'm rubbing it in their face at the exact moment they can least afford to hear it. I think about the time my closest friend got promoted while I was unemployed and living off savings that were disappearing fast. I could see him hesitate before telling me, like he was bracing for it to hurt me. It didn't. I was proud of him instantly, completely, no math involved. What I was going through that week had absolutely nothing to do with what he'd earned. Here's the confession I almost skipped writing down. I am 27 years old and I have never once sat down and actually planned my finances. Not a spreadsheet, not a budget, nothing beyond checking my balance and hoping. It was always only about getting through the month when I had less. Now that there's slightly more coming in, I'm realizing I don't even know where half of it disappears to every week. I texted my friend about it that same night, half expecting her to have this all figured out already. She wrote back almost immediately. Same. She said she'd never had enough money at any one time to actually plan around, that it was always only money coming in and money leaving again. No strategy, no cushion, nothing to organize. Somehow that made me feel less behind and more unsettled at the same time. Unrelated, but I have to write this down before I lose the nerve. Last week I was talking to an AI chatbot about something completely different, and it referenced a specific person's name and their exact job. Someone real, someone I have never once typed into that app. I asked it why. It couldn't answer me. I asked again. Still nothing. I made it wipe the conversation and I still think about it most nights. So here's the question I keep asking myself with the phone still lit up in my hand. If I could say one true thing about my money with zero shame attached, what would it be? I already know the answer before I finish typing it. Volatile. Not broke, not fine, only volatile, swinging between okay and terrified depending on the day, and I don't know yet what I'm supposed to do with that.